Welcome to Environmental Law Explored, a podcast series, the podcast of the American Bar Association section of Environment, Energy, and Resources.
This is the Forest Resources Committee podcast. I'm Andrew Kihn. This is our first episode in the series, Mill Closures and Workforce Shortages in the West. In the American West, few issues are quite so pressing as the vast and sweeping string of mill closures reshaping the forestry sector. In this episode, we're joined by Jesse Wade, economist and director of tax and trade policy analysis for the National Association of Home Builders, who will walk us through the economic landscape underpinning these issues. Jesse, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with the big picture, and what I have for you isn't exactly a softball question. When we first met to discuss this episode, you mentioned that the majority of the lumber supply in the United States, around 70%, goes towards housing or housing-related industries. Presently, the United States is in the midst of a housing stock crisis, with estimated shortages in homes ranging from 4 to 7 million. Meanwhile, in Oregon alone, where I'm based, 7 mills have closed this year. At first blush, at least us non-economists, this would seem to fly in the face of the ordinary interaction between the primary market forces of supply and demand. So before we dive into workforce-specific challenges, I think it's worth pausing here to contextualize these greater trends. Can you help us understand what's going on here? Why are these mills closing at a time when the products are so widely needed? Does this reflect a larger national or maybe international trend, or is it something more regional?
Yeah, great questions. So actually, as of last week, the current price for 1,000 board feet of lumber was about $441. It was actually up for the sixth straight week. But really, for most of this year, prices have been historically low, below 400 for over 25 weeks. This year has actually been really tough for many mills because of these low prices. 2021, prices were up around $1,500 per 1,000 board feet. In 2022, they were actually $1,200 per 1,000 board feet as well. So they were really successful in 2021 and 2022 when there was really high demand for their lumber. But really 2023 and 2024, we haven't seen that same demand that we saw in 2021 and 2022. So these lower prices have been affecting these mills because they can't operate at a above break-even point. And then, as you mentioned, residential construction is the primary consumer of these products of softwood lumber that these mills produce. The residential construction industry includes remodeling construction, single-family and multifamily mainly, big consumers of softwood lumber. For most of the year, residential construction has been lower than anticipated. Really, at the start of the year, we were anticipating about 5 rate cuts from the Federal Reserve throughout the year, and that just did not really occur. Inflation remained higher than anticipated for that beginning of the year, and that prevented the Fed from lowering our federal funds rate, which has a broad effect on a lot of interest rates across the economy. So housing didn't rebound like it was anticipated to at the start of the year. The Fed actually lowered rates last week, 25 basis points, after cutting at 50 basis points in September. So a lot of builders have been on the sidelines because higher interest rates result in higher interest rates for their acquisition, development, and construction loans they use in residential construction. So it was much more costly for them to get loans and start homes. So builders have really been waiting for these rates to come down to help boost construction. And that would boost the demand for lumber that we were expecting to see at the start of the year. And this has kind of been a mix of the national trend. Chinese residential construction is way down, so that really dampens demand for softwood lumber. And then a lot of these mill closures have been, as you mentioned, in the Northwest. I say Northwest to include that British Columbia area in North America. That's a large area that produces a lot of lumber. They've seen a lot of mill closures just like Oregon, but it's been a regional and international trend. One of the regions is actually doing really well in the United States. There's been a few mill closures, but it hasn't been as impacted as the Northwest, is the southern region of the U.S., right around like Florida, all the way to Texas, up to South Carolina. They actually produce a different type of lumber than the Northwest region called Southern Yellow Pine. That south region of the U.S. has actually overtaken Canada as the region that has the highest capacity to produce the softwood lumber that we need for residential construction.
Well, thank you very much for fielding that complex set of questions and laying the foundation for us here. These are complicated issues. I know you have a particular specialization in tariffs, and as you touched on the international components here, a hot button issue in the most recent election cycle, tariffs are nothing new for the United States lumber industry. Could you tell us a little bit more about that history and how you think it informs this current mill closure issue in the Pacific Northwest?
Right. So tariffs are a tax on the importer of a good. The the exporting country doesn't pay that. The person who imports that good actually pays that tariff price to the U.S. government or customs when they import that particular good. For lumber in particular, this issue actually goes back to about 1980. These are the so-called lumber wars between the United States and Canada. It's been an ongoing issue. There's been multiple agreements that have come and go. The last agreement was 2006. There was a softwood lumber agreement that actually expired in 2015. And consequently, because of that, U.S. producers petitioned the U.S. Department of Commerce to place anti-dumping and countervailing duties on softwood lumber imports from Canada. So this tariff has been in effect since 2017 on Canadian softwood lumber producers. That's one of the reasons, as I mentioned, that South region U.S. has actually overtaken Canada as the largest North American producing region of softwood lumbers. Because of these tariff rates, there's negatively impacting the Canadian lumber industry significantly. The current tariff rate went up from about 8% to 14.5% in August. So tariffs are definitely an issue for continued lumber. It increases the price of lumber. Canada has a market share of imports into the U.S. of softwood lumber about 85%. That's actually down from about 95% where it was back in 2016. You can kind of see that direct effect of when these tariffs went in place, they don't export as much lumber to the United States. And as the residential construction industry has a super high demand for this lumber, the U.S. just doesn't produce enough lumber to meet that demand that we have. So tariffs are a big issue for a lot of our builders and NHB in general, because we need this lumber to build homes that are affordable for families across the U.S.
Thank you very much for that context as well. Certainly, situation I think many people anticipate to evolve in the coming years. Turning to the workforce specifically, now that we have this broader context, mills in the West that have closed in the past year have cited a range of reasons for shuttering their doors, all the way from global market trends, which we've talked about some, to regional regulatory barriers. Among the most commonly cited reasons, though, for closing shop is workforce shortages. Mill closures have been attributed by owners and operators to the challenges they've had in hiring and retaining the labor that they need to keep their operations running. Some have gone even further and pointed to a shortage in available, affordable housing around their operations as a particular barrier to workforce hiring and retention, which is a sort of economic catch-22. How does this map onto the workforce trends you're seeing throughout the housing supply chain? Is this unique to this industry, this region?
Yeah, so this is definitely not a unique issue. This is an issue across the board for many trades. There's a significant skilled labor shortage for housing, for sawmills, for almost any trade you can think of. The U.S. population is continuing to age. A lot of baby boomers are entering retirement, no longer working. So that's shrinking the labor force. And then also, even with tariffs in place, if we just look at sawmills specifically, it's remained relatively level, around 90,000 workers at sawmills since about 2015. So there's not been any benefit to workers in the sawmill industry, as we don't see more employment in that industry, even with these tariffs in place. But across all trades, we really need to focus on training, retaining, and recruiting workers as the U.S. population continues to age. And then also with this issue, immigration is a big part of this issue as well, across the board for many trades. About 30% of the housing of the workforce for residential construction is made up of immigration. Anything that limits the labor supply there would only result in more housing affordability issues, because we won't have the workers to work and build these houses. And it's really tough there when the U.S. population growth is driven by immigration. About 3.3 million immigrants came in the country last year. That was definitely a rebound from 2020 during the pandemic in 2021 and 2022. Definitely higher than that. But we need workers, and there's just not enough people going into the trades. We need to get people off the sidelines and just try to bring in more workers to any of the trade sectors, whether it be sawmills or housing supply. That'll help alleviate affordability issues in housing and just help boost labor supply in general.
Building off of that, you bring a perspective as an economist that's distinct from that of most of our listeners who are from legal or maybe policy-oriented backgrounds. To build on what you've been saying, if you were trying to reverse these trends or these workforce challenges, Do you have any particular legal or policy changes that you would like to see made that you prescribe to address these issues?
So a win-win for housing and the domestic lumber industry would be obviously more domestic lumber production. So I think we need to start with finding the inefficient rules that are holding back those really successful mills and allow them ability to expand their production, become more productive to hire more workers. Finding ways to bring workers off the sidelines to work in lumber production would obviously help to boost local economies. I think the reason we don't agree with the tariff in place, it allows mills to maybe not implement the newest technology or try to achieve higher productivity. And so they aren't as productive as they could be, and they're inefficient for the economy overall. Like many subsidies or tariffs, they create inefficiencies in economies because they don't allow for the efficient trade of goods or maximum production from more competition. But anyways, education, showing people that they can be successful in the sawmill industry, the working in trades, working in home building, showing them that can be a lifelong career where they can be successful and make a living wage where they can be productive in the economy. It's just finding those rules that we can remove that will help boost lumber production, not only in the US, but also in Canada, will also help boost housing, given the current affordability issues we have.
Well, thank you for that. Definitely a complex bundle of solutions for a very complex
Yes.
situation, but you handled that with grace, and I think those are all very interesting insights. We've been dancing around this some through the questions we've been speaking of, but to address it head on, we just had an election and a new administration is going to be coming in January. It's starting to be filled out at the time we're recording this episode. How do you see the economic situation around these issues changing under this incoming administration?
Right. So if you think about the incoming administration, what we really think they'll be focused on right away is extending a lot of their tax cuts from 2017. So 2017, they passed the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. A lot of the tax policies in there weren't permanent. A lot of the corporate rates were, but none of the personal rates. So they're going to be focused on that. And then to pay for a lot of these tax cuts, it's estimated to be, these tax cuts are going to cost about $4.6 trillion over the next 10 years. I think is the latest estimate, but they're hoping to use tariffs to pay for a lot of these extensions from 2017 and using those tariffs to help support domestic activity. We really have to be careful here with that. Tariffs can be inflationary. They can protect domestic industries when they don't need the protection, limit their need to innovate or become more productive. So tariffs can have this inflationary effect. And then also with passing these tax cuts, given their high bill right now, a larger deficit would be inflationary as well. It would result in higher interest rates more likely as well. But if these tax cuts really promote economic growth, it really reduces these risks. So we need to really focus on ways and looking to make the economy operate more efficiently is really critical because a more efficient economy will yield more growth in the long run. And then as we've been talking about kind of here, housing has really been not really contributing positively to the economy over the past few quarters. I think last quarter actually subtracted from overall GDP growth. So to address housing affordability issues, making the economy more efficient will help address these issues by making manufacturing work better, making sawmills work better, just creating an efficient environment for economic growth. And then we see a lot of the solutions for this housing affordability are supply side issues. You mentioned that 4 to 7 million housing shortage. We estimate it's about a 1.5 million housing shortage. But over the next 2 years, we actually need to build at a level of 1.1 million homes per year to actually reduce that deficit, our estimated deficit of 1.5 million homes. But we haven't even been building at 1.1 million homes for the past few years. So that deficit is just going to increase to grow. So it's really a supply side issue. We need to build more homes. That'll help renters. That'll help those frustrated home buyers on the sidelines. And of course, it'll help those builders to alleviate housing affordability issues. And it'll provide more economic activity for all those who feed into the building sector, including these domestic lumber producers.
Jesse, thank you kindly for your time and insights today. And for our listeners that may be interested in staying up to date on these economic and housing policy issues as they evolve, I encourage you to check out the National Association of Home Builders blog, I on Housing, UIE on Housing, which is easily found online, where Jesse and his colleagues regularly contribute. Jesse, is there anything else you'd like to touch on today before we log off?
No, I mean, just following up with it on what Andrew said, check out our blog, posting every day on housing issues on the economy and economic trends. And thank you for having me today, Andrew.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jesse.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. To learn more about our section, please visit our website at americanbar.org/Envira. Please check where you found us for future episodes. Thank you for listening.